All right, David, this is kind of one of my favorite topics. Influencers, not the ones on YouTube, but people that sometimes in a minute or sometimes in a lifetime have influenced us. And when I speak, I talk a lot about my grandfather, him, my grandmother, my mom, my aunt. They were from Kiev, and they immigrated to Canada years and years and years ago. But I remember my grandfather used to take me for walks in the park in Montreal when I was about 5, and he spoke to everybody. There's that gene I think I got. But and one day I asked him, I called him Zeta. I said, "How do you know all these people?" And I remember him pointing to somebody coming up to me. He said, "See that man there?" One day I smiled at him, and he looked at me and smiled back, and then came over, and we became friends. And then someone else saw us smiling and even laughing, and they came over. And I remember my 5-year-old mind, which some of my friends say I still have, but that's another conversation. My 5-year-old mind said, "But life's going to be pretty easy. All you just have to do is smile at people." And then, you start getting older and you over expert it until you get a little more older and you see it, just even a smile at the right time can make an impact. So we've all had different types of influencers in our lives. Can you share two or three people that have been influential in yours?
Well, I would say before I do that, to segue off of what you said about your grandfather, that was very much my one of my grandfathers, the one I didn't know as well, but he would know everybody, and he and his father too, my great grandfather, they would just be know every if they were on a train trip, they'd know everybody on that train by the end of that train trip because they were friendly and outgoing. And so, yeah, that's a good quality to have. I didn't know that grandfather as well as I know the other grandfather, my father's father would be one of the ones that I would say it was very impactful on me. He was involved, in business. He was involved on a lot of boards, and generally was a good person in his own way. That ironically he was not at all religious. He wouldn't get caught dead in the church. Actually, he did when he at his funeral kind of thing, probably. Well,
Oh
actually, no,
God.
I think he was cremated, so maybe he wasn't caught dead there literally. But the point is,
Right.
he's not gonna get. He is not gonna go to a church. But he and one other gentleman that locally, when a church was having trouble, he and that other gentleman helped that church survive. My grandmother had gone there, some, but not necessarily a lot. So despite being like, I want nothing to do with this, and he still helped that organization, and he was very public service minded and involved in a lot of boards. And so at one point, he even ended up on the California State Water Commission appointed by then Governor Reagan.
Wow. That's
But that was, and at that point, he kind of threw his hands up and like he hated the bureaucracy. Being a farmer, he understood, water, and he'd been on water boards and stuff before, whatnot. But then he was so fed up with the bureaucracy and what they were doing at the time. They could have solved a lot of those water problems, but nobody was willing to act. So he finally, I don't think he didn't really stick around there too very long, I guess. So my grandfather was one influence. Another influence would be my that friend I mentioned earlier in our interview, World War II veteran, friend of the family, is close enough friend. We called him Uncle Bob. And so I heard a lot growing up from Uncle Bob, about how he'd grown up during the Depression, how, just his experiences. And he didn't really he never married and never had kids. So he had, a niece and a grand nieces, but he didn't really have him. So in a way, I hung out a lot with him. And, so it was symbiotic because he never really got to have kids. And it's like you said earlier, it's like how could we both benefit each other? And I learned a lot from him. Everything from when he had worked at Cantor Fitz for Gerald. He knew the old man Bernie Cantor, and to the point. Okay, I don't know if I want to say this on Oh, I'll go right ahead. I gather there was a phone in the guy's bathroom. So when Bernie would have a conversation, sometimes he'd be talking to Uncle Bob while he was on the toilet.
Lovely.
That's how close he was, in those conversations.
Hey, listen, I've
And
seen that at airports. I hear somebody talking in the stall.
but
Really?
this was back in the day before cell
I
phones.
know.
That's kind of what I heard, so things like that, and he worked some in accounting at one point in the entertainment industry, and the gossip I heard about some of those old, stars. We'll leave some of that. We'll leave some of that not for public consumption.
Well, sometimes the Uncle Bobs who are not related but are uncles are the best uncles.
Yes, it was great, But I just so yeah, I would say those are a couple. There are other people as
Is
well. I
there
would say
one? I know there's probably plenty. Is there one that you has been influenced but you never met?
I was going to finish right there. That I would say there's some that are influential that I will not name because they were influential in a bad way, and it's
Right.
like I learned like what not to do by
That's true.
seeing them, and don't want anything to do with that kind of person.
That's real.
It's
You better
but I
believe it.
will
That's
not
real.
give them the credit by naming them.
I love
But
that.
you said
Well,
people I have not met. That's a good one. I would say, hmm. I would say, I mean, some stories I heard about a great grandfather. He was were highly impactful.
very cool. Well, I think I appreciate you sharing that because I think we all should always remember that we're influencing people often without even knowing it all the time.
The
And it's a
influence that
choice.
great grandfather had was pretty, if I think about it, it was pretty big. He was a surgeon, and back in around World War I, he was too old to be drafted by that point. He had a thriving surgery practice, but he volunteered to go over to help the wounded in France, and he was chief of surgery, I guess, at a base hospital there in France. And I have some photo. I don't know if I think it was probably from like a newspaper or something, or it said something like the finest man in the world had to shave his beard to wear a gas mask. And obviously he'd left that practice. But from what I heard, at least growing up, when he came back, that practice was pretty much intact again because of the respect that people had because of that decency in general that he had had with his patients. His father before him had been a minister, but he was like a minister to his patients, had been very helpful to them, and was just generally the general character of him. And then that when he came back, he didn't lose business.
Well, that's a legacy right there. So thanks for sharing that, and thanks for being influential yourself in the way you do it. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
You're welcome.